Oh, he's recording me now, so that's a good sign, isn't it? He's still with us. So I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So please feel free to ask questions throughout the whole workshop. Don't save them till the end. If you see that I'm doing something and I've not explained the information that you need to know, then just you're muted, so you need to press your space bar and hold it down and ask your question. I love it when people ask questions as I go through, because it helps me relax and it makes me feel like there's someone there, because it's always very weird teaching on Zoom. So please feel free to ask questions as I go along and just interrupt me. Those of you who are regulars know that I talk all the time, but I will keep offering opportunities for you to ask questions before I go on to the next thing. But do interrupt, I don't mind, and it's not rude, I promise. Other housekeeping. So lots of people now have been finding interesting ways of working with me during these workshops. Some people actually start working on a project as I'm working. Some people just like to create their own sketchbook page of notes whilst I'm sort of talking, so it's like they're preparing to do a workshop in their own time. It's really hard to, so I'm still admitting people as I go, oh no, Gavin's done it. It's really hard to do your best work during a workshop because you want to take in all the information. So I think that the illustrated sketchbook pages that I've seen on Instagram that have been taken whilst I'm teaching, I just think they're such a great idea, because they help you remember. So you can do some little sketches and experiments and make some notes along the side, and it makes a really lovely sketchbook page. If you have a look at the hashtag Wild Ink Art Class on Instagram, you might see some of the sketchbook pages that people do. And I always try and put that hashtag on them if those people haven't, because it's really interesting for us all to see that. It's so inspiring. And it's a great way to make the information go into your head. So that's a good tip. So I think that's all the housekeeping. Yeah, so work at your own pace. I will work fast, but don't try to keep up with me, because you get the video, so you can rewatch little bits that you've missed and go over other stuff. So it works really well working like this. Is that everything? Yeah, I think so. Right, okay. So I'm going to introduce myself because there's so many new people on this workshop today. My name is Lucia, and my background is in lettering. I'm an illustrator and an artist, but I've been looking I've been quite blocked over the last few years, and I've had very limited time to make my own work. So I've found that creating illustrated sketchbooks has been a really nice outlet for me, and very creative and just relaxing. It's really nice to be able to record things that I see in my day. It helps me remember, because I'm quite forgetful. And the things that you see that are beautiful in your day, to take a little bit of that beauty and pop it in your sketchbook is just so nice to look back through. It helps you remember other things about that day. So my wildflower sketchbook pages, when I look at them, it's like that day is imbued into the pages, so I can feel the sort of sun on my back, or the cold wind, or the rain, or however it was. I can remember what the smells were like in the air, or the words that I was hearing people talk in the background, the conversations that were happening in the background. So illustrated sketchbooking is a really important part of my life now, I think. And if I've got little moments of creative opportunity, they might only be fragments, but I like to know that I've got a sketchbook and I can just draw a little part of my day, or record something really beautiful that I've seen. And obviously wildflowers is a big part of that. But I'm not a botanical artist, and I've never ever done a botanical sketchbooking course, or a lesson, or read any books about botanical illustration or anything. So I'm probably similar to you in that I've got no background in botanical illustration. So that's my disclaimer. So I'm wearing my illustrator's hat today. It's quite a pretty hat, I like to think, with paint splatters and a red feather, maybe a pen sort of poked in it. And when you put this illustrator hat on, it kind of means that anything goes. The rules are gone, and you, as long as something works for you and you're enjoying the process, then nothing is wrong. So it's a really brilliant hat to have. I kind of need to do a little free workshop on helping people illustrate their own illustrator's hat. So I kind of like to visualize that you've got one on. Okay, so basically anything's okay tonight. Now, flowers are quite new to me. I generally, people and buildings are my thing. I really love sketching that kind of thing. But I love flowers and I love seeing flowers. I love gardens and I love walking in wildflower meadows, and I've never really sort of sketched them because I don't know where to start. So this year I wanted to start a garden sketchbook, and I've been trying to draw more flowers. I don't really, like I said, I don't know the rules of drawing flowers, which is why I'm kind of just making them up. So I'm giving you my made up rules as a gift. You're welcome. But what I've found is that actually drawing flowers is brilliant for all abilities. So if you are a very advanced and experienced artist who's been drawing for years and years, then you can apply your own skills to flowers. You can take a lot of time drawing flowers and getting them intricate and visually correct. If you're a beginner artist, flowers can seem to be tricky, but it doesn't really matter if some of the things are a bit wonky, because it just kind of adds to their illustrative look. And it can also go with your character. So if you are a perfectionist, you can spend ages drawing really intricate, beautifully visually correct and representational botanical art. But you can also, if you're a bit like me and quite messy and disorganized and, you know, a bit of a trickster, you can just sort of throw in all sorts of little bits and hope for the best. So I'm hoping this is going to work for all of you. That's what I've been learning whilst I've been doing this garden journal. So let's go down to my other camera and get started on it all. Okay. Oh, look, my glass of Prosecco's there. I always treat myself to something special on a Thursday night. So what I'd like to quickly do first of all is just show you a bit of a few things that have inspired me over the last few weeks. So first of all, this little book that I got from a charity shop. I love the lettering on it. And it's cigarette cards that used to be in old cigarette packets, and it's all wildflowers. So the idea is that you'd smoke loads of cigarettes. It's not not very health conscious, I know. You'd smoke loads of cigarettes and collect the wildflower cigarette cards and put them in your album and collect them. And I like to steal ideas from stuff like this. So for my sketchbook, I love the idea that the page colour is yellow and that there's brown frames around these little cards. You know, you could create little cards with illustrations on and cut little frames in your sketchbook. You know, we could steal that idea from this book. You could do painted illustrations and then a few brown or pencil sketched illustrations as a contrast. So things like this are great for us. You could also steal this layout idea of little boxes. You know, this is a really easy layout idea because this page mirrors this page and the text is here, so you could write your little bit of text there and you could do an illustration in a box here. So lots of ideas to steal from things like this, and that's why I love picking up old books, because you know, even little things like this and the cover, there's so many ideas there that I think I could try and use in an illustrative style. Another book that I really love, so I'm a big fan of children's books, and this one particularly is lovely because it's a bit like a sketchbook. So it's aimed at children to educate them as to different types of wildflowers and trees. But again, lots of lovely ideas to steal. So this is by Charlotte Voke. illustrated by, and those are the authors. And here's some of the nice ideas to steal from her lovely book. So, you know, this would be a great sketchbook page that you are looking at the anatomy of a flower, all the different parts of a flower. Maybe one of your sketchbook pages could study the leaves of different wildflowers. I also love here that the lettering, she's got a lovely sort of an italic version of this Roman hand that she's done. So the name is written in a slightly italic hand, and then she's got this sort of Roman version giving information, and then a capital at the top. These lovely shadows as well, really gorgeous. Here's another idea to steal, look. Small animals or just speech bubbles. So small animals with speech bubbles or just speech bubbles, and a little wash of watercolour around them. This is stealing like an artist, remember? So it's not, we're not flat out copying, we're just looking at a little idea and then seeing what we could do with that idea, incorporating it into our book, into our sketchbooks. The other lovely thing about this book that would be great in a sketchbook is the colour system at the top. So in order to identify wildflowers, there's different colours at the, well, that's one under trees, at the tops of the pages. So you can identify your wildflower by the little swatch of colour. So that's white one. So there's a little bug on there. And that would be something so easy and lovely to do in a sketchbook. So all lovely stuff, really. Yeah, and just gorgeous illustrations with very nice additional information. So this says furry bumblebees are just the right size to pollinate foxgloves. Really lovely. So that is Woodland Walks, A Guide to Trees and Wildflowers by Charlotte Volk, and it's been published by the Eden Project. Okay, and finally, my source of the sort of start of all of this came because I bought this book from a charity shop, and I just wanted it because it was a guide to wildflowers, and I keep seeing wildflowers when I'm walking and not knowing what their names are, but it's actually a really beautifully illustrated book, and I didn't even realise. So it's got lovely illustrations, lots of really great information. And the artist who's, I don't know who the artist is, it doesn't say because it's a Reader's Digest one. I'm not going to be able to find it now. I'll have to put it on my Instagram stories, but she's got, there's some beautiful, oh here we go, some illustrated panels here, which I just think are beautiful, done in watercolour, just as like an end page almost, which, yeah, lovely, obviously done in location, but that was the thing that first inspired me to create a sketchbook page full of wildflowers, was looking at this. What I also love in this particular book is things like this. So because I bought this from a charity shop and it belonged to somebody else, they've made notes all the way through the book of where they've spotted these wildflowers, and I love that. So this person spotted wood sage on the Pembrokeshire coast path at Cardigan in July 1987. Love that. Tells another story about this book, but I kind of want to incorporate things like that into my my journal. The other great thing if you've got wildflower books like this is that if you've spotted and sketched a wildflower when you've been out and about, you've got that little sketch down. When you come home, you can then look it up in a book like this and add additional notes, you know, little bits of information about leaves, close-ups. So I would use these illustrations to draw from and not feel guilty that I'm drawing from someone else's illustrations, because the work in my sketchbook, I'm not selling that work. It's not for profit, it's for my own benefit and for my own learning. So to use these beautiful illustrations from this person who's obviously a botanical artist of, you know, really a very skillful botanical artist, would be a fantastic addition to my own illustrations. So lovely nutlets, look, these little bits that are produced from the white horehound. So all very interesting stuff. So have a little rummage. You might have bits and pieces like this on your bookshelf. You might have kept children's books because you love them, and just try and look at them in different eyes so that you can steal some of the ideas.
Heather Angel did a lot of those illustrations.
Who did?
Heather Angel.
Heather, did she do them in this book? Is that you, Anne? And Heather Angel is a calligrapher, isn't she?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Was,
yeah. Okay, so let's put those aside. Right, so my own sketchbook then, currently at the moment, is this one. I've got a garden journal. It's got lots of things going on with it. Lots of little experiments where I've been sketching bits of my garden, not just wildflowers, but parts of my garden. So these alliums, I'm going to be showing you the same techniques that I'm doing the wildflowers I've used to do these alliums in a process of layers, like always for you regulars. Move on. It's been an interesting experiment for me. So this page particularly is an experiment, which is all the borage patch that I had, and there was lots of movement when I was sat here, lots of bees, and I did this in preparation for a blind contour free Instagram live class, which is on my Instagram TV in the Wild Ink art class feed. So you just need to go to the little TV symbol on my feed and click on it, and the film of us doing these blind contour wildflower drawings is on there, and it's an hour long, so it's a free workshop that you can enjoy, and lots of really nice techniques for building up a page of flowers. Call it as a dead mouse. And so this was what I've been sort of playing with over the last few weeks, is muting the background. So I've painted the background of my sketchbook page with watercolour. And then I've been sketching and painting on top these wildflowers. So we're going to be looking at these different techniques today.
Is the white flower in gouache?
Yes.
This is Kate. Thank you.
Okay, it's nice to see you.
Well,
yeah.
I've got you blocked because I'm sick and I look like awful. So thank you.
Okay. There's lots of people I know that have still got their pajamas on with a glass of wine in
Well,
there.
I wouldn't mind being in my pajamas with a glass of wine, but I'm sick and I look like it. So.
Oh, well, I wish you well. I hope you get well soon.
Oh, I will.
But yes, this is done with gouache. So I started off doing a negative sort of drawing and painting up to it, which I'm going to show you during this class. But it wasn't as white as I liked because I'd made the background a mid-tone colour. So I ended up going over them with white, and it looks effective. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of, if something's not working, then just keep throwing stuff at it until it is. That's my general artistic philosophy. And the same with a lot of these, I've added little bits of gouache. They didn't go quite as badly as the daisies. I like to lick my sketchbook, some of you know, or lick my finger and rub to kind of give a softer finish to the paint or a watercolour pencil. But actually a full-on lick is a-okay with me. This is what we're going to be working on today. I think that's about it. Oh yeah, just and again, the same techniques can be applied to doing a vase of flowers, which I think probably needs to be a whole different workshop. And I will definitely do a workshop on doing vases of flowers because they're so nice to do, and they're nice to sort of paint on a card and then get it printed and give it to friends. I'm going to come back to this because we're going to do some of these bits and pieces, but just to let you know that this background. I was doing an experiment when I started this page, and you're very welcome to try this experiment if you want to, which is that I painted the white paper with a little tester pot of acrylic emulsion and added a bit of watercolor to it. So this has got a slightly acrylic-y, plasticky finish to it. So the watercolor, because it's semi-waterproof, the watercolor takes longer to dry and kind of pools in different ways, which I'm very excited about. But if you're a beginner, I would just suggest that we're going to start right at the beginning. You know, just work onto a white paper, which I'll talk about in a minute. So I'm going to be using this for further stages this evening, but if the paint reacts slightly differently, it's because I've put this acrylic background on. I'm not 100% sure whether I like working on the acrylic or not, but I just thought it's always worth a try. Okay, so we're going to start with doing a few watercolor techniques. Just let me show you some of the techniques that I use with watercolor paint to create the lovely sort of blended effects. So I've got a piece of watercolor paper here. This is hot pressed watercolor paper. It's really good quality water paper. I really like using good quality water paper. If you're not using watercolor paper, I would recommend this. So wherever you are in the world, I know that you'll be able to get heavyweight cartridge paper by a good art company, and it's kind of like the weight of card, you know, so it's quite thick, and it means it can hold a little bit of watercolor, but it's still in a sketchy way, so it's not expensive, and you feel like you can just sort of chuck it away if it goes a bit wrong. So it can take the pressure off if you feel a bit nervous. So I'll be doing some other stuff on that. I'm going to be just doing the experiments on some watercolor paper. Hot pressed means that it's gone through 2 rollers, so it's really nice and smooth. And because we're sketching these flowers, a smooth watercolor paper is really nice to have. Okay, so I've got my watercolors here. Variety of different colours, and lots of the colours will appear in boxes that you've got that you can just purchase, you know, as a pre-made box. But mine are tube watercolors that I've decanted into this palette and just left the lid open, and they just go hard, and when you add water to them, they become lovely and soft again. So I just give them a little spray. I say that my little sprayer is not working, my Poundland sprayer. It's not doing anything. Oh, there we go. And that just activates them, and I find that the colour when I do this just seems to be a bit better. I also spray my palette a little bit. That can be very helpful. So pick a colour, any colour, it doesn't matter, because we're just going to do some experiments. I've got quite a nice purple here, so I'm going to pop a little bit of purple down. If you haven't got a purple, you could mix a bit of red and a bit of blue together, or just use any colour that you've got in your palette. I always like to grab, I don't like a colour directly from the palette, so I grab another colour that's similar. So with purple, we know that blue and red make purple, so I'm just going to pop just a tiny touch of blue there and mix it into the purple, so it's not the exact colour that came out of the palette. And I'm just going to lay a little bit of the purple down on my paper. Can you see I've got quite a nice puddle? It's a runny puddle, it's not dry. I'm going to stick that little square down there, and I'm going to leave that to dry because we're going to come back to that. So let's call that technique number 1. Okay, so we'll come back to technique number 1. But technique number 2 is really useful for leaves and stems. So let's mix up a green. I'm going to use a bit of blue. So this is a cobalt blue. And I'm going to mix it with a nice, well, it's very grubby looking, cold yellow. Yeah, so it might be a bit of a grubby green. It's quite nice to mix your own greens because they are a bit less bright. So that's a mixed green if you haven't got a green. I've got a couple of greens in here. This is sap green and a colour called Viridian, which is in a lot of palettes, which is a really bright green. So I think most of you will have this in your watercolour palette, Viridian. Never use that on its own. Just add a tiny touch of blue to it. Can make it a lovely dark colour. Or Viridian. Again, with one of your yellows, just experiment a little bit. Then becomes another nice colour. Viridian, green. And this is the case for any green that you've got in your palette that looks a bit like a sort of alien green, that's a bit bright. Just take a tiny bit of red and mix that in, and again you get a lovely sort of muted green. So any pre-mixed greens that you've got, by adding blue or yellow or a tiny touch of red, you can change that green. You can also just mix the greens. So that's something that I do quite a lot. So Viridian with a bit of sap green could be a very quick and easy tree or leaf colour. I'm never that big on mixing exact colours for plants. I just kind of get a sort of, you know, an approximate colour. So for this technique, we're going to pop a bit of green down. So it doesn't really, again, doesn't matter what green you've got. It's just a demo of the technique. Just mix up a bit more of this. So here's my green. So this might be a leafy background. And whilst it's still wet, you pick up, again, a bit more green or a blue, basically another colour. I quite like to mix it in. So a darker blue in a green is going to make a nice dark green. And you just touch that dark colour into the green. And you get a sort of a darker area. So this is called wet on wet.
Lucia, it's Lou.
Hi, Lou.
Hi. Whenever I do that, it never does anything that looks like yours. Is the green you've touched, the darker green, is that a puddle on the page, or is the page just damp?
Yes, no, the paper isn't damp. The paint, the only way you can do this wet in wet technique is if you've got a very wet puddle already, because if it's starting to dry, then it's whatever you drop into it is not going to disperse. So it might be just that your paint is not wet enough, Lou.
I think it's too dry on the page when I'm trying to add to it. Brilliant. Yeah. So a puddle on the page first before you add more. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
And you need to, a good way to tell is you can see it on mine on the, actually can you, on the camera, you can see a sheen, like a wet sheen. As long as you can see that wet sheen, generally you can drop in that darker colour and it will still blend. So that's wet in wet. Now I've called this next technique a 2-colour stem pool. Only because it's just to remind me that this is what I do sometimes with these little flowers. So I'm just mixing up kind of a purpley colour really. don't know what I'm doing with that. So imagine that perhaps you've painted your flower in purple like that. Let's imagine that's our flower. And this is a bit like a wet in wet technique. And then say you were painting your stem. So we're going to do this in much more detail, but it's just to get something down. So you'd painted your stem with a bit of green. The stem currently at the moment is not touching the purple flower, but if I just bring it up and it touches, the two colours will mingle and the green will pull that purple down into it as it dries. So I'm not touching it, I'm not going to touch it at all. So you can have a go with all different colours with this technique just by, let's try a sort of a pinky colour, pinky purple. And again, exactly like before, the colours do need to be wet whilst you're doing it. So it's a little bit like wet in wet, but it's just, there's just a little connection between the two colours. So that would be colour number 1. You can do it with blocks of colour as well, because it's always quite interesting to see how they react. I'll just pick up a little bit of this green. So you do the bit of leaf or stem first, and then you'd bring that colour up to touch. And with them both being wet, you can see that I'm not mixing them at all with my brush. I'm just allowing them to touch. Jamie Oliver, the chef, I was watching him do some cooking, and he was marinading some chicken with something with some herbs and spices and lemon. And he said they get to know each other, the flavours get to know each other. And I think this is the same with the paint, that just leaving it, they'll get to know each other without too many introductions. Okay, so this was it has got probably a technical watercolour term, but I've called it a 2-colour stem pull, because this is a technique that I use when I'm adding a little stem. Okay, I'm going to have to zoom out a bit so you can, whoops, zoom in, zoom out, because of my teeny tiny little workspace, my little cupboard under the stairs. Okay, so this is let's put that as technique number 3. Technique number 4 is a lovely, it's probably my favourite technique. So again, let's have this sort of purpley pinky kind of colour, doesn't really matter, as our flower colour. And say you've done your lovely flower here, blobbity flower, but you could just do it as a circle or a box or whatever. Wash your brush off. I've laid my paint down, washed my brush off. And I want to sort of pull and soften these edges. So with my damp brush, I'm going to just wet the paper here. Again, like the stem pull, I'm not touching it yet. I'm just wetting the paper. And then I'm just going to go up to the edge of the flower and touch it. And very gradually, you can hardly see it because it's a very subtle technique. The colour has been pulled, it'll gradually be pulled into the water. So I'll do it with a stronger paint so that you can see it a little bit better. So here it is with red, well, pinky red. I'm washing my brush, making this area wet. So I'm not creating any connection at the moment until I just touch there. And you can see it's so subtle. The colour where the connection was is gradually pulling pulling the colour into that. And as it dries, so it's going to, again, exactly like this one, I'm not going to interfere with this. This is truly, I believe, allowing watercolour to do its thing, and you can't control it. So it's going to have an unpredictable result. So I'll do it here. Again, more, but just one little connection, and exactly the same as all of these two techniques, it has to be puddled, so you have to have a wet point. You can already see these little softening edges have got an interesting petal-like quality to them. Like I said, it's a bit unpredictable. But yeah, it's a bit subtle with the purple, but I still like that. Okay, and one other key technique that I like to use. Also, what should we call this one? Let's call it pulled petal edges. It's like pulled pork, but petals. And the last technique that I use a lot is lifting. So let me just pop out. So again, I've laid down some colour. This is something that I do quite a lot because I get very overexcited with the colour. It's always going to dry lighter, watercolour, about 3 times lighter. So it's worth going in with a really strong colour, knowing that it's going to dry lighter. But sometimes I go over the top and I think that I've just put a little bit too much in. And so what I do is I'll just put another blob down a minute. So what I do is wash my brush and really get the water off. So very different to the pulled petal edges. I'm really wringing my brush out and sort of squeezing the water out here. So I've got sort of a dry brush, which means that when I touch this flower, I'm lifting, it's getting absorbed into the brush, the colour. So it's lifting that colour out, like if you spilt a drink on the floor and then you would maybe mop it with a dry mop. So we are kind of mopping up this spilt flower, but it gives a really interesting effect because you can then very easily lighten areas. And again, you can only do this when your flower is wet. You keep going back in and working it and getting it lighter and lighter, sort of wringing your mop out, your brush, and going back in. So an interesting experimental use of watercolour, I think, lifting. I quite like that. That's my go-to because of my overexcitable watercolour usage. And the other lifting that I use is on this one, still wet, is just with kitchen paper and just dabbing. You get a lovely tonal effect, I think. It has kind of a petally effect. So you can see I didn't spend any time putting these blobs down, but they are, I mean, I wasn't even drawing flowers, but they do have kind of a slightly watercolory, flowery look to them just by removing and lifting some of the colour. And it suddenly becomes quite interesting to the eye. If you're worried that you've lost too much colour, when it's dry, you can go back in and add a bit more colour to it. You can also add colour with pencils, which is what we're going to be doing too. So let's call this lifting colour. So that one we lifted with a brush or mopping. That's not the technical term. Mopping up the spillage of watercolour. And this one we did with kitchen roll. kitchen paper. So let's go back to technique number 1. And this isn't going to work 100% well because, and I can tell because I feel it looks dry. So there's no shine on number 1. It's drier than the others. But when I feel it, it feels a little bit cold, which means it's probably still damp, but I'm going to go for it anyway. But that can also be a good tester for you. Just touch it. Does it feel cold? So this number 1 technique is laying down colour. So for instance, if you've painted a flower, you could then mix up the same colour again. So I think that was a purple. This purple is so powerful. And I put a little bit of blue in, didn't I? So I'm doing exactly the same colour that I did before, but it's a bit punchier. As you can see, it's a bit less runny. It doesn't need to be because it's just, we're going to add this colour on top, and because it's dry, it's not going to mix like the wet in wet technique, and it's going to be a bit like adding 2 layers of tissue paper on top of each other. So you can see there, it sort of creates an extra depth in colour. So if you've done your floral painting and it's looking a bit washed out and it's dried much lighter, to know that you can add another layer of watercolour into it to add detail is brilliant, isn't it? It's a lifesaver. It's a good cheat, I think. So I'd do this basic sort of colour layer on my flowers, and then I'd use this second glazing layer to add a bit of texture. But the bottom layer must be dry first. So this is called, and this is a technical term, it's called glazing. So this is sort of glaze 1 or glaze A, and then once it's dry, you stick in other little layers, and you can overlay colour. So I've gone with the same colour, but if you had a flower that was, you know, perhaps a pale purple but had little accents of pink, to add in another glaze with a different colour would look interesting. There's so many experiments to be had here with the colours in your palette that you could create a whole little mini sketchbook full of different wet in wet techniques, different pooled edges, and to see how the colours work in your palette using these techniques means that you can then use them with an informed mind and an informed hand. So are there any questions at this stage about these little techniques?
Could I just ask which red you use? Because I've been using alizarin, and obviously that stains a lot, so it doesn't look nearly as delicate as the pinks and reds that you get, which are lovely.
Alizarin does stain, but that's exactly what I was using. So
okay, I'm just inept.
So no, definitely not. So actually, that's my alizarin. So maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was using the pink. But maybe you just need a little bit more water. But it will stain. But you should be able to still get that delicate pull with an alizarin. This is the other one I use, and I always get them muddled up, and sometimes I mix them together. That's quinacridone pink, and that's alizarin crimson. So alizarin is a standard in all watercolour palettes. So I think if most of you have got palettes that have got ready-made pans, that alizarin crimson is the sort of very blood red. And then this one, mine is Pyrrole Scarlet, but cadmium red is the same, is that lovely sort of like an orangey red. But it's worth having a go. I mean, that's got a lovely quality to it for pulled edges. But yeah, maybe your alizarin crimson needs to be watered down just a little bit, so that you get more of a pink tone, because you can get lovely pinks with alizarin crimson. And the other way to get a nice pink with an alizarin is, because I know lots of you probably won't have a pink in your paint palette, but I would recommend, if you can, get a little tube of a love, like a really, really bright pink, like a peony pink, it's good. So this is my alizarin, but putting a tiny bit of a cold yellow, like a lemony yellow with it, softens it, and you get a lovely pinky colour. And again, you could just keep, if it's too pinky, you can just add a little bit more red. I use alizarin crimson and this lemony yellow for my skin colour tones as well, so that's got quite a nice pinky colour.
That's really helpful, thanks.
So yeah, so I think the key is looking at colours that are harmonious and knowing that whatever colour comes out of your palette, that you can add a little bit of something that is similar to it, is going to really change and make that colour more complex without you know, without too much brain power, because we don't want to have to use too much brain power, do we? So one, I'll send this to you tomorrow. Lots of you have got it. It's free, and the free stuff on my website. But harmonious colours are always grouped. So you choose a primary colour. So for us, it was alizarin crimson. And you can just sort of work your way one way around the colour wheel, up to usually 5 little blocks. So there's the colour 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of those are harmonious to that colour. And the same, you can go the other way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By just adding a tiny touch of any of these similar colours, you're just going to change and make that colour more complex. The same with any colour on here. So you just pick the colours. Usually harmonious colours sort of start with a primary. So whatever, but you know, we were using purple, weren't we? So say we're using purple, we know that we can add colours in this direction to make this purple slightly more interesting. So reds and blues. So that's a really nice way to use the colour wheel. And again, like I said, when I send out the video, I'll send this with you. You can get it straight away though if you want to go to the website. Okay, so are there any, when we were going to go back over these techniques as we do some sketching, but is there any more questions regarding colour or paint at this stage, or do you feel like you're all right to keep plodding on? Have a refresh, maybe have a cup of tea at this stage. I'm going to change my water. Right, so we'll let those little sketching techniques dry. And the next thing to have a little go at is, painting techniques. And the next thing to have a little go at is some sketching techniques. So I'm going to grab a couple of bits of paper. So I've just got some of my cartridge paper here, and I've got a bit of rough paper. And you've got some nice references, which today I realised I hadn't put any of the names on, which is really unhelpful. For those of you who aren't based in the UK, these are wildflowers from the UK. So it might be that you do a little bit of research and find some images of flowers that are local to the area that you live in. I don't like drawing from photos with flowers. It's always easier because they're a two-dimensional image and we're creating a two-dimensional image. So it's a great place to start if you're a beginner and you are a bit worried about going out to sketch, is to take photos and sit quietly at home with all your stuff out and have a go. But obviously in an art class where, you know, I'd like you all to be at my house and walk up the hill with me with a flask of tea and a packet of biscuits, and for us all to go and sit in a field and draw flowers. We can't do that, so we've got to go with the photos. But I hope that the same techniques that we're going to use with the photos, you can then take out in the field, as it were, because it's really nice to sit on a blanket in a field and draw flowers. So like I said, I realised that I hadn't put any of the names on. So this afternoon I sat with my little book and I wrote the names. When you get the video, you can pause this still and write down those names if you don't know what they are, which I'm sure probably lots of you do. So that's for that page, paused still. That's for that page. And I've put these on the bottom. So there's the pause if you want to jot them down. Oh, except I didn't know what this one was. So I left a little gap. Does anyone know what this one is?
Yes, it's called Fox and Cubs.
Fox and Cubs, thank you very much. Let's write that down.
I don't know what its Latin name is.
Fox and Cubs, well, we can look that up, but what a lovely name. Okay. So here's a few basics that I use when I'm drawing flowers. Let's start with a really simple one. So this is the sort of flower. Go for a feverfew or scentless mayweed, this one is, and feverfew, and daisies. There's lots of flowers that have this sort of typical centre with petals around the outside. What I want to show you is a quick technique that I visualise. So I would draw the large shape first. Actually, I might just do this with a different colour so that you can see a bit better. And then, so it's a circular shape, the outside shape, and the middle is a circle. And then obviously you do petals, it's like the good life. You do your petals that would go like this. If you imagine, well, most of the time we see flowers, they're not like this. So if you imagine that circle becoming more like an ellipse, do a cross down the middle, do the centre, the centre of the flower. By drawing the petals along the edge of the ellipse, it gives you the correct proportion of petalage. So if you're viewing your flower from the side on, again, draw your cross section here, draw your circle, and again the flowers still meet the edge, but they just become flattened. So this is also useful if you've got a slightly conical shaped flower too, if you're seeing it from the side. It's a great little tip for creating 3D shapes. So I should have done that on the circle, having that sort of central cross in the middle. But knowing that as the flower tilts and tips, the central cross stays the same and gives you the indicators of where that flower is. So that's a really good tip for daisy type flowers or flowers with lots of petals. You can also mound that circle in the centre there, as it is on these. So they are mayweed, very much like feverfew. But there's quite a few flowers that have that domed central panel. But once you've got that first little structure, adding that on, suddenly everything becomes quite nice and three-dimensional. So that's worth remembering. One of the other techniques that I use for other types of flowers is using a larger shape first. So I'm just thinking, so even something like, oh no, we'll carry on with these. So very similar. So these are very similar to our daisy daisy type flowers in that they've got that little centre and then petals on the outside, but they've got a certain number of petals. So in a similar way, you draw your outside shape, and I'd be doing this with a pencil very lightly, just sketching this out. I've got my little middle area. And instead of doing the cross section, I just count the petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I would just make a little mark. So I've got 1 there. 1, 2 petals, and then there's 2 either side of that central bit. Just making a little mark on my circle, which means that I can put those petal shapes in, sketch them in, and know that they're going to be evenly placed around that centre. And I'm sure lots of you have done this, where you might draw the centre and you start doing the petals, and then you end up with a bit of a big gap between them all. So this way is quite a nice way to add in those petals, and know that each one that you draw, they're going to end up in sort of the right place. They're going to be equidistant. And that would be my starting point. So I would draw those petals in pencil, just as a basic shape. And then I'd go in with a fine liner pen to redefine the shape, which I'm going to show you on the next stage. But that's just a little tip with counting the petals and then placing them around the edge of your circle. So really we're working on all of these from a large overall shape to a smaller shape, smaller and smaller, not adding any detail. We're just looking at what the big shape is and then working in the next biggest shape, and then the next one and the next one, and all those other little bits come in when we're adding paint and pen and detail. Sometimes it can be so exciting to add the detail that we do that a bit too early, and it means that that gets lost. So it's holding back other shapes of flowers. So yeah, I think this for the dog rose can be using the same technique as this, getting those shapes in, and the same with all of these. When you've got there's a lot of shapes that are like, a lot of flowers that are like this, where they've got kind of a body of petals, and always then I would go in with so looking at this clover here, go in with the big shape, and I would do this very light with a pencil so that I can easily rub it out. But I just get that big shape in, get that stem in, and just a kind of a reference to where the leaves might be. And then go in with some finer detail. So it means I'm looking at the bigger picture, and then bringing in those tiny little sort of nice edges. Still working big, so I'm still working on this big shape. And then a few references to the shapes that sit within that larger shape. So I'm going to go back and do this properly with pen in a minute. Yeah, the same with the cornflower. And I think with all complicated flowers, or the vetch, so that vetch there, the shape it makes is kind of like a parallelogram, like a rectangle, like that. So that would be a great starting point, and the stem goes like that. That would be a great starting point to drawing, because I'm looking at no detail. I'm just looking at a broader shape, and then go in with some smaller details. Leaves are very interesting for me because I don't pay a lot of attention to them because I'm not a botanical artist, and I would say that all of my illustrations are style over substance. So I'm looking at some details that I want to capture, but things like leaves, I tend to just paint very loosely with a brush, which again, I'll show you. So I don't add, I mean, it might be that I quite like a pattern that I think it sort of works well. So I might then add, again, just very loosely with a pencil, those shapes. But yeah, I'd go from this large shape to bringing in some of those smaller shapes and adding a bit more detail that way. Right, so that's a general sort of breaking down. The same, sorry, I'll just say again, just other flower shapes, the conical flower shapes like foxgloves and like this orchid, pyramidal orchid. I again visualize this three-dimensional shape, so it's sort of a triangle, isn't it? And then there's a stem. And that would be my pencil drawing to start with. I'd go in straight away with that big shape, and then I would start to look more carefully at some of the edges of that big shape. And bring some of those details in. This one's interesting. We're going to do this with, as we did with the plantain in a minute, that you can see that the petals sort of take there's a pattern to the flower. Well, they're not petals, they're flowers, aren't they, as they open. So bringing in the shape of the darks can be quite useful to then bringing in little smaller petal shapes, flower shapes. Right, so that's where I'm thinking large shapes to small. Let's do some more detailed sketches. Let's go from a start to finish on a more difficult one. Feel free to go easy on this if you want to. I'm going to choose this plantain because I think it's more of a difficult shape. But again, and it's good to try a difficult one because some of the petally ones are very easy. Same techniques apply. So if you look at the overall shape of this, you obviously can't do this in the field. Slightly more unusual. So that is one. If you've got photos, drawing the shape with tracing paper over the photos is really great. We know that we can turn that over and transfer it onto a piece of paper so that you've got an outline, which is one of the great cheats of this sketchbook club. But you can't do that if you're sat in a field. But using this technique is great for helping you see an external large shape. So I think these are split into two shapes. There's this sort of long sausage shape, and then there's this petally shape. I think because flowers are so beautiful, you can become overwhelmed with all the colour and the detail and everything else. But you're looking to kind of go back and back and back all the different stages for this first shape stage. So let's have a go at drawing these plantains. So if I was taking my sketchbook out, this is what I would be doing first. I'd have a pencil and I'd go in with this sort of basic shape. I'm looking carefully at getting that shape right. And then, so about there, I've got that shape. And it might be that if you're drawing a petally wildflower, then you're starting with a circular shape. So we'll go in with this one too. I'm looking at the gap in between as well. So sometimes drawing the negative space can help if you're sketching. So that kind of goes like that. Like that. And then helpfully I haven't got the stem. A plantain stem is very straight, luckily. We'll just bend these a little bit towards each other. Not complicated. So that would literally be my stage one. If you, depending on your experience level, you may feel with a pencil now that you want to do the next stage. I use this as my stage one, and I then go on to using a fine liner pen, which is waterproof. But feel free to do this next stage if you feel a bit worried, but just, you know, stick with your pencil if you want to. If you've got a bit more experience and you feel happy about going in with ink, then go in with a lovely fine liner pen. This is what I would do at this stage. So just getting that down on my paper means that in my sketchbook, I've got a pencil layout. Waterproof, fade-proof pigment ink. So there's loads of pens like this on the market. So this is a fine liner that when you sketch with it and add watercolor over the top, it's not going to run. So it's going to act like a skeleton for our drawing. And there's so many different types of fine liner pen. Just check that they're waterproof and you'll be fine. So this is a brown one, Faber-Castell, Unipin, Mitsubishi do one. There's these manga ones that are waterproof. And I've got this lovely platinum carbon pen that are quite difficult to get hold of at the moment, but I love it because you get a lovely fine line with it. So if you're going for a fine liner, choose one with a smaller number past the 0. So they go up to about a 0.8. So a 0.2 or a 0.1 means that you'll get a lovely fine line. And then looking at so I've got this structure down, so I feel now that I can go in quite happily, and I'm looking carefully at my subject, and I can just bring in some of those outside shapes, and I'm not doing it as a really thick line. It's a fractured line. And I'm not adding lots of detail. Because remember, we're like going from big shape to little details. This is our initial sort of stage, as it were. It keeps it nice and fresh. So those little seed heads kind of there. And as I've said, this pen work, or it could be pencil. So I do sometimes do full pencil drawings and then wash watercolor over. That's absolutely fine. This works like a skeleton. So it's going to do lots of work for the watercolor. And it means you could just throw anything at it and it's going to hold up. So I'm looking really carefully now at some of the edges and shapes. I'm not adding lots of these little stems because I'm quite keen to do that with a pencil. But you could add in these little sort of stemmy bits. And again, I'm doing the stem, but can you see that the line is slightly fragmented? It's broken and gentle because it's going to be painted. So we just want to hint at there being a line. So this is not quite as heavy as my pencil drawing, sort of bits that come like that. And when I'm looking at this, I realise that, again, it's got this, well, the geometry, as always, for flowers. It's the dark areas are making a pattern like this. So when you look really carefully at flowers, you can find these little treasures that are going to help you with your drawing. So I'm thinking, if I, as a cheat, because I don't want to draw all these little tiny seeds, I can't be bothered, I'm too bored with drawing tiny little things, and I've got like a million flowers I want to draw. So I'm just going to draw those shapes in, that pattern, curving it, because remember it's 3D. Or if you start looking into the geometry of plants, you're in trouble because it'll take you down a proper rabbit hole. Now, you can see that where I've put the lines, that's where the darkest areas are. So if you blur your eyes at any of the flowers, so you kind of look through your eyelashes and you see those dark bits, that's a great bit to get in with your pen, because again, it means you can slosh a load of watercolour over and you've got a lovely sort of dark skeletal structure. So I'm looking at the sort of shapes that are inside these dark bits. These little seed heads kind of look like that, don't they? This is my version of illustrative drawing, which is that I'm kind of looking, and I'm sort of making it work for me at the same time. So I'm sort of cheating. And I do think this is the brilliant thing about illustrative art, is that you've got permission to make it work for you, but there needs to be a big looking element. So even if you look and then look away and draw what you can remember, you get lovely, very relaxed looking plants that have just got the basic shape. I'm just adding some of this structure. I'm not putting all of the seed heads in there. Sort of seed heads. Are they seeds? Yeah, maybe. I'm just putting a few in to suggest that detail. So that's definitely a dark area that I've added with my pen. Other dark areas. So let's blur our eyes again and look through your eyelashes. You see there's a few other little dark bits here and a dark sort of space there. So I'm just going to add a bit of shading in those darky bits. Anywhere that you feel you need to define with your pen on your flower. So this technique applies to all flower drawing. So a good thing for you to do this weekend is to try it with a different flower. This is a hard one to do. So it's good to start with hard, isn't it? So at that stage for these, because this is so sort of frilly, actually I might add a few of these little few more of these little seed heads. I quite like the idea of adding these little stems. Are they stems? Stamens? Where the seed is. I like the idea of adding those with coloured pencil, but perhaps doing them with a pen. Do some of them will give us quite a few nice dark bits. Okay, so I'm just going to give that a little waft because you need your pen to be dry. And once you've finished your pen sketch and you feel happy that it's given you enough detail of all the little sections, then rub out your pencil, and then it will look like you've just drawn it with pen. So it's really important that you rub out all your pencil, unless you want a little bit of it to show, because once you paint watercolour over it, you can't rub the pencil out. The layer of watercolour sort of locks it in. Sometimes you can get rid of a bit of it. Sometimes I like having a few pencil lines on there. So I've not gone on with masses of detail because we're going to add some colour now, but it's enough of a structure for me to feel like I've got lines that I can follow, and I've got a nice bit of dark area that's going to hold that in place. Other things that you could use for creating this outline, or this darkest. Oh, hi.
No.
Did you have a question? No. Yeah, so other things that you could use for creating a structure are obviously different types of coloured pencil. So you could do this sketch in an oil-based pencil or a watercolour pencil. That would be very exciting, because as you paint it with watercolour, it would all leach into the colour. Graphite, different coloured fine liners, and then experimenting with non-waterproof ink would give you a very lovely blendy effect. So we've gone full on waterproof. This is one of my favourite sketching techniques for a refined sketch, but a loose sketch I love to use inks that aren't waterproof, that just leak into the watercolour. So you're looking at that as your skeleton. What are you going to use for your skeleton? And that's another area of experimentation for you. So experimenting with the painting techniques and experimenting with what your skeleton sketch will be done with is good. Okay, any questions at this sketching stage? Okay. So I'm just going to, I think perhaps we should maybe sketch something else whilst we're sketching. I'm just thinking, is there any, maybe we'll do a white one too, because I think the white flowers are really useful. So let's just, I'm just going to do one of these. What was that one? That was a feverfew, wasn't it? So bring that out, because it's nice to do a negative sketch with white flowers, and there's a few nice techniques. So we know this sketching technique, this is pretty easy. And anything face on like this is a great place to start if you're a beginner. So I've started you really hard with that plantain. Oh, now I've got to get all these little petals now, 1, 2. Oh, I'm not going to bother. I'm going to wing it. And this is the nice thing about the illustrating, is that even if we've got a few that aren't quite, if there's not, you know, there's too many, then that's okay. That one's got a bit big. One behind. And again, if you are a confident pen sketcher, it might be that you do this outside shape with your pencil just to give you a guideline, and maybe the inside shape, but then you sketch the petals with pen. If you're doing lovely free blind contour and expressive sketching, then you just go in straight away with pen. I've kind of run out of space. So go in with my pen again. Maybe I'll try this with a different colour. That would be interesting. So I've got a Faber-Castell Pitt pen. See what that looks like. So that's quite a thick one. Yeah, let's do that. It's kind of bumpy, the little edges of the, so I'm going to do like bumpy dotted lines. This, when I've got a structure of pencil, the pen work, I relax and really enjoy getting more detail in, knowing that I've got that sort of backup of having the pencil in the background. I've been working a lot more freely than this lately, not worrying about what the end result will be. And I've been pleasantly surprised at all the really interesting marks that my pen makes. And I was trying to work out where this type of drawing sits in my creative practice, being someone that likes quite abstract work and expressive, quick drawing. And really where I think it lies is that it's very gentle and meditative. And when you look at something for a long time and draw it, you can't concentrate on anything else. So if you're worried about something, or if you've had a really busy day, you know, those days when you've got so many things to do and your head is just spinning, and you feel like actually what you need to do is sit in front of the telly with a cup of tea or a glass of wine or something like that. Sometimes I think that can make it worse, can't it? Because it adds on to more things that are going on in your head. But this to me is like an active meditation. And so I've realised literally just this week that this is where I find it much easier doing something like this than meditation. Focusing on something, looking hard at it, and then drawing it. I've lost some of those, so I've gone to do a contour, which is quite interesting. So there's also a nice little bit of texture. You can't see it so well on this Zoom, but looking at your image, you'll see that there's little tiny sort of pollen-y bits. And I really want to get that bit of texture in with my pen. So I'm going to just do a few little dots of texture. And at this stage, I get quite excited because I know that the tightness of this drawing means that I can really, blend and blow out all of the watercolour, and know that this will hold all that loose painting together. So I've just changed to a smaller nib, a 0.1, because I'm looking at some of the shading. There's little dark patches as the petals join the middle part of the flower. I'm just going to add in some little sort of shading parts. Anywhere where two things join in anything, so if it's a pot on a work surface, or a flower joining soil, or petals joining the middle part of the flower, any two things that are touching, there's always a slightly dark area. So even if you can't see it, adding a tiny bit of shading in between those two things is very effective visually. Some of these petals are I'm looking really hard now. They've kind of got like a little creasy line in them. Again, this is a great place to add tiny details that you see that are going to help with the structure. Feel free to take those lines out of your flower. Sorry, just refocus there, it's a bit better. So if I see any line, I quite often extend it out of the parameter of the flower. Again, I'm not being botanical, so I'm being illustrative. And I love it that just takes my eye a bit further.
Could you use a grey watercolour pencil to make the contours on the petal?
Yes, you definitely could, yeah. And in fact, you could create those petal contours with the paint later on, or when it's all dried, you've done this, you've painted it, you can add it with pencil afterwards, which I'll show you how to do. But yeah, absolutely. I really like adding quite a lot of detail with fine liner pens. I guess it just depends on the approach. So there's lots of different ways that I go about things. But this sort of structured approach is great, I think, for taking some of the pain out of the decision making, because you know that you're getting a lot of the work done. The pen is doing a lot of the work for you. So in theory, I could not paint this properly within the lines tool, which I'm sort of not going to do, but I could just splatter paint all over this page and still that structure would remain strong and solid because of that. So I guess it just depends on your painting technique and what you want the final result to look like, but they would look nice. And actually, if you brought in that watercolor pencil at this stage and then painted it, it would blend in really nicely. Another little experiment. So there's a couple we've got a bit of structure down, a bit of sketch structure. So I think it's time to do a little bit of painting now, because we're at 8:30. We've only got half an hour left. I can't believe it. It goes quickly, doesn't it? I want to show you the different techniques that we learned earlier and how I would use those in this particular painting. So let's just have a little sip. I'm on the Prosecco again because I forgot to get my glass of water. I've got a Tunnock's tea cake. Put it on my windowsill in case I got hungry. I don't know at what point during this workshop it would have been good to start eating a Tunnock's tea cake, which has got marshmallow in the middle. Okay, so clean water. I'm going to put my reference to the side a little bit, so you might not be able to see that, but I know you've got one. Glancing at the plantain. Right, watercolour. The other good thing about having a little spray bottle is that you can give your palette a bit of a clean mid-paint. So I can get that off. So I'm going on holiday quite soon, and I'm wondering what to bring. So I'm thinking I might mix it up a little bit. I want to do a little bit of painting when I'm away. I'm thinking if I just bought a very limited palette, do I even bring my watercolours? This, I've never thought that before. Watch this space, everybody. I'll let you know how I get on. Okay. Right, so let's go in with this plantain then. Where did I put my brush? Where is it? So let's have a little look. So we've got generally a pinky colour, much lighter seed area there. I'm gonna do the little very, very pale light areas last. And we've got that darker structure down with the pen. So I'm looking for a middle tone, which is what I normally do. So I'm looking for like a middly pink. So not too dark, not too light and white. So, I mean, we could go in, we spoke about alizarin crimson before. So we could, alizarin crimson, this cold red might be a good starting point for that. It's a red flower, so that's a good one. Remember about the harmonious combinations. So if you've got a pink like me, I think maybe a pink would be quite nice to add, but you could also add a little bit of purple to that because it's kind of a maroony red, or maybe a bit of blue. Oh, that's a bit of green on that blue. Don't know where that came from. So I've got a ultramarine up here that's hiding behind that water. That's a, it's got red in it now, but it's like a sort of a navy blue. And again, most palettes have that, but it's a lovely cold blue. So that's given me a bit of a purpley red, just adding a little bit of that. Might add a bit more red. I quite like that, sort of a winey colour. So that is alizarin crimson and a bit of ultramarine, but only a tiny bit, just to make it slightly purpley. I'm going middle tone, so I'm just going to add a bit more of both. It's going to dry lighter. And so I'm literally going to just paint this section very lightly. I've painted that top. I'm going to dab this area because it's much lighter. Painted that whole top section. Dab, dab, dab. And that would be me done for first stage. Remember the pulled stems, so maybe I'd make a little bit of a green here at this stage, or use a ready-made green, and so I'll make a green and add a bit of ready-made green. It's kind of a fresh green, but I'm looking at the colour of the stem. I'll go quite a bit lighter. So I'm just having a go at mixing all those different colours that we talked about before. And I'm going to bring that stem in a slightly, not solid, I'm just dabbing and then bringing that up to the edges of that lovely red colour for that stem pull. So I'm not mixing, I was just touching. It's only going to mix if it's still wet, so you needed a nice wet puddly mixture. So I'm leaving it there. If you felt like you would fancy doing the petal pull and you've still got a bit of dampness in your paint at the top, you could always just, I mean, I think these petal pulls are just like a decorative detail. So I'm going to make that bit of paper wet and just edge up to the edge there. So I've got a bit of a bleed of colour. I'm sorry if you can hear a little whistling noise, it's the dog. And just up to that, it will show if it's not wet enough and it's not going to pull any colour, then it doesn't matter. It might pull a tiny bit and soften a little bit. I love these pulled edges. Maybe because this was lighter, maybe this would be a good technique to use inside this plantain, because it was lighter, wasn't it, where all these seed heads are. So just dabbing a little bit of water is pulling some of that colour there. Remember, one of the other techniques that we looked at earlier to make lighter shades was lifting. So if you've gone in really heavy-handed with your brush at this stage and you've not left little areas of light, perhaps now is the stage where you rinse your brush off, squeeze it out, and then you might feel like you want to lift little areas of colour. But if, remember, it's going to dry lighter. So unless you've kind of gone in and got overexcited, which no judgment here, is what I do a lot, you could lift little bits. So just have a little fiddle about, you lift little bits off of here, might be interesting. It's all about experimenting, isn't it? It might be that you like to go for a much more refined approach. But this, I guess this is just the way that I paint, because I don't know how to paint properly. It's my kind of made up way. And the more you do it and the more problems you come up with, the more you come up with a solution. I think that's what's happened with me. I'm going to leave this one at this stage because I'm going to use that technique, this one, number 1, glazing, and go in with another layer on top of this. So I'm going to leave that to dry, because remember with technique 1, the bottom layer had to be completely dry. So leave that to dry, and let's move on to this little feverfew. Because with a white flower, really a lot of the work's already done here, and we're not going to need to paint much of the flower. We're going to paint the middle section and some of the green leaf around the outside, because that's going to really make the white of that flower pop. It's the thing that makes it so prominent is the dark edges, isn't it? So let's have a go at doing the middle part first, because that's lovely and punchy, isn't it? So let's zoom out a little bit, use a bit different part of my palette. So I'm looking at it's really good if you've got lots of different images from books, or you've got a few different real flowers to look at, because you can then look at the variations in colour and know that basically any variation of yellows and oranges is going to work. You don't have to be specific. We're going to recognise that as that particular flower. So I'm going to just go in with, this is a very dirty yellow, as most people's yellows are. Give it a bit of a clean. But it's all right, isn't it? It'll do. If you've got a few yellows, again, you could add other yellows to that yellow to make an interesting yellow. So I've got like an ochre here. That's going to not make it so bright. It's going to knock it back a bit.
Lucia, it's Nikki. Can you hear me?
Hi, Nikki. I can hear you. Hi.
I'm sorry to take you back to the previous step on this, but it's just with the plantain or whatever it was.
Yep.
Right, you've done a really gorgeous little splodge on that left flower at the top with that pulled sort of water technique.
Yep.
I just wonder, when you're doing that in a sketchbook, do you have do you plan those specifically? Because obviously you know, do you have them all on the same area, or do you just do random splodges, or is there any rhyme or reason to why you've done that particularly there? Or is that just artistic license that you would just do as you see fit as your, does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, well, probably a bit of both, in that if you were doing this on a sketchbook page and you had maybe a very bare area up here, it might be quite nice just to bleed it up a little bit. Generally, most stuff, and I'll cover this a little bit when we talk about layout very briefly, which is just something to touch upon. Generally, I do it as a kind of a random thing. And I start with bigger shapes first and then move into sort of smaller detailed areas. We'll talk about it with regard to the layout, but I would say 90% of the time it's random, and I just get a feel that I think I'd like to pull that little bit of colour because it looks particularly damp.
Yeah.
I feel maybe the edge is a bit hard or harsh and I just want to soften it. But then maybe there's a little 10% design element in there, if that makes sense. But I would, when I talk about layout, I'll touch on that.
That's brilliant, thanks, because I could get really carried away with those because I love them so much, and then just create a whole load of mess.
I know, I agree with you that because it's so lush, and it's so satisfying to watch the pigment falling into the water, that it's very easy to get carried away. I'm there with you. So I think it does need to be restricted ever so slightly. And you do need to be a little bit reserved with it. So maybe have a page full of little pulled petals so that you get it out your system. Have a pulled petal purge, Nikki. And that might help. Okay, so I've mixed up a yellow here with a bit of one of my yellows and a bit of another. So a kind of an ochre colour and a lemon colour. It can be anything. I just want to break up that yellow from being the one out of my palette. And again, dabbing, just a little dab on that. So you see, I wasn't painting it particularly well. I've got a really big brush, so I can't add any detail. I just did it then, so I'll just demo a bit of a mistake. So say you did your dabbing and you dabbed out of the area a little bit. You can do the lifting again. So while it's still wet, dip in your water, squeeze out your brush, and just lift any bits that you have gone over the edges with your slightly dried brush. So that's a good sort of little kind of technique to pull back some of that colour. I've left little areas of white, so I just dabbed it. It's really nice to do that. It gives the eye a bit of contrast. So I'm going to go, that's my first glaze. So I'm going to go back into that, but I just want it to dry a little bit. And then I'm going to just do this really lovely dark area around the edge of the white and not paint the white. So that's our painting of the white. So I'm going to, I think probably, sorry, it's very difficult to try and get all the detail in and for you to still be able to see. So here's my green that I had before just for that plantain. So I'm just going to use a bit of that, make it darker a little bit maybe with a bit of blue. Remember to play with all those greens that you've got. I've got a big pad which is just full of greens that I can get out of this palette that I just tested out, mixing yellows and blue combinations and green and blues and green and greens and yellow and greens. And that's a great reference. So a nice puddly mix, a movable mix. I've got a bit of blue and a bit of green. And then with my big brush, I'm going to paint the outside area. And what I'm doing is moving this little bead of water, bead of colour, basically, shifting it around the outside. So it's watery enough that I can move it about. I'm sorry about the whistling dog. So I don't think I needed to pick up any colour then, but I'm going to just pick up a little bit more colour and just sort of dab it in. And so this is the sort of stage where I could just draw a few leaves with my brush. So I'm looking at the leaf shapes of these flowers, and I'm making sort of just a very gentle reference to them without having to do too much detail. Remember our wet in wet where we dropped in a dark colour. So whilst this is still wet, I want to bring in that dark blue and add it into this green that we made and make it darker. And then I'm just going to touch that dark blue in. And it's only going to go in the areas where I've got paint. So you can go right, that I've it's wet and that I've already painted. So you can go right up to where the petals are and just touch your brush and leave it, and it won't go into your petals. It will just pull into the surrounding area. It's very satisfying. And you can go really dark with these. Don't use black, you don't need to use black, just dark blues in your palette. You can even drop in a blue directly into that green. So let's try that just to see. It might look rubbish. It might literally look amazing. It's the only way that you're gonna find out. So I'm going to go back into that blue. I've got pure blue. I've not watered it down. I've literally gone straight into the palette. Oh, that looks really lovely. So I'm just going to touch it into a few different spots. And again, this is just going to do a little bit of work. You could, if you're feeling more detailed with the blue, you could add in more detail. I mean, this is a lovely sort of simple leaf to do. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to, whilst that's drying, I'm just going to let the dog out because I think you might need a wee. Bear with me. So all that noise you heard from our dog was because there was a hedgehog outside our outside our patio doors, and he was sat there looking at it. He's just looking at it, having a little sniff of it now. So the few leaves are not this colour, they're not blue. I've properly got my illustrator's hat on now with just creating an artistic impression of what I see that they're like. In fact, some of them have got a bluish tint to them, a tinge to them, but I just want to use this as a different way of laying out a flower in my sketchbook, which, like I said, we'll talk about. If you've got some harsh edges to your green and you want to soften them, you can just use the pulled petal technique, Nikki. You can go nuts with it here. Just to soften a few little bits. I know it is delicious. This is my favourite technique. You can use this pulled technique to, you could sort of pull and create frames, sort of pale frames with it that are almost non-existent, that are sort of a shape for your flower to sit into. And again, at this stage with the drying, all sorts of exciting things could happen, but we just need to leave it be. So let's quickly go back into stage 2 of this. Now it's dry, we want to put another glaze on. I'm going in with exactly the same colour, so I'm just mixing up a bit more. So I think that was alizarin crimson, wasn't it, and a little bit of ultramarine. I'm just making a slightly stronger mix of it. And I just want to, what I want to do is get a little bit more of this texture in. So I'm not going to use much, I'm just going to just do a little bit of dabbing. And this is so useful with almost every flower that I do, is this idea that you get this first glaze down, so the top bit is a bit darker. You get this first glaze down and you can be so free and wild with it. And then, like we were working from large to small in the drawing, we are working from loose techniques to tight. So at this stage, I'm being a bit less free with my technique. I'm still kind of relaxed though. But this extra area of tone is so impactful on the eye. You can see that what was a wishy-washy flower suddenly starts to pull itself together. I'm just looking at the reference and very loosely adding this darker tone to areas where I can see on my reference that there are dark tones. And at this stage, I'm not doing the petal pull. So I feel if you have, like Nikki, got overexcited with your petal pulling technique, that even if you've done loads of it, adding this next structure, this next level of glaze is the thing that really holds it together. And we're going to go on top of this again. So we're going to let that dry. And I might just add another, again, with most stems, there's a little lighter part of the stem, and then there's always a darker bit too, and the lighter bit is at the edge, and the darker bit quite often connects. Remember, when things connect, they're darker to the flower, and it also sits on the middle of the stem. So that bit of dark green that we had, that could also just go in for another little stem glaze. Up the top. I'm leaving this. Let's go back to this little one. There's not too much work here to do now. But
Lucia,
Yeah.
could I ask you a question?
Yep.
Does the class finish at 9? Because I was hoping we'd see how to create a sketchbook page.
It does, yes. And I will talk you through.
Or will there not be time for that this evening?
Yes, there definitely will. I usually do go over. I'm so sorry.
Okay, thank you.
You'll get. You'll also get video. So if you need to leave at 9.
Okay, yes. So you will be doing that. Then I can watch it another day. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you can.
Thank you very much.
So just going back in with this middle part of the flower, I'm just going to add to my yellow just a little bit of orange, or you can add a little bit of red to the yellow. Sorry for going over, everybody. Most classes do finish on time, but there's so much to do in this class. I hope you don't mind.
It's really lovely. Thank you, everything we are showing us.
Oh no, that's great. I just get carried away. I could do this till about 11 o'clock, maybe later. But I promise it won't be that long. So yeah, I've just gone in with my second glaze exactly like these. I've just done my little bits of dabbing on with a slightly different color. I've gone a bit oranger, but I'm leaving that. So on white petals, even though you can't see any blue, it's really effective just to pop the tiniest touch of blue onto white, and it really makes it go pop. So I've got a cobalt blue, an ultramarine, any blue will work, I think. So I'm adding this in. Here's my blue. It's quite pale. And it's the lightest of touches. I don't really want to touch that. I mean, if I had a bit more time, I would probably allow that middle bit to dry completely before I put this blue in. So I'm going to try really hard not to touch that orange, but I'm just a few little dabs of blue towards the center of those petals, really make them sort of pop. But again, I wouldn't go in and do any more layers of that blue. It's just the tiniest touch. If you've got overexcited, remember you can lift it. So if you think you've got a bit too grey, or you just wring your brush out with clean water and just lift some of those little bits if you felt like you'd gone a bit too far. I'm liking the contrasts that I've got from those glazes and this sort of negative space. And like I said, I literally could keep going till 11 o'clock. I could keep doing this for about 6 weeks and working through all different flowers. But I think that the same principle applies in this flower to loads. So that's why I use the plantain as a more complicated example, because exactly the same applies to doing any of these. You're laying down your base colour very, very lightly and loosely, and then using the same colour as a second glaze. That's the key to creating those underpaintings. So I'm going to go back to just add a few more details to this when it's dry. And I'm just going to talk to you about layout and finishing off with little labels and stuff like that. But I thought I'll leave this to dry and then we'll go back to do that in a second. But really, my layout thing is quite instinctive on a sketchbook page. So it's also very dependent on what size your sketchbook is. But let's imagine that this A4 piece of paper is an A5 sketchbook that opens like this. Most of my wildflower layouts are quite often with whole stems, and this for me is a fail-safe layout. So creating almost stripes of wildflowers as I go along is easy, because you're just going from one to the other. What you can do is, if you've used, like I've got here, a little bit of pinky red, I'm making sure that that colour is being repeated somewhere else over here in this page to allow the colour to take the viewer's eye across the page. But the structure, the linear structure is one of the key things to this, which makes it so easy. So it's just like little blocks. And I've got a couple of little blocks down there, as you can see. So I would say this is the easy option. It also is dependent on how you look at flowers, and you can really make them work hard for you in terms of layout. So for instance, if you're looking at a flower with a whole stem, you've got this long vertical layout option. But if you're looking at a flower directly from above, as in here, then it gives you license to just do more of a square layout. So maybe I'm going to have to try and find that pad. Very cleverly took my markers out. Here we go. This is the next page. So this is a combination whereby I've got stem structures and then a square box looking down on the flower from above. So I decided when I started this page that it was all going to be a vertical layout, and I did the daisies to start with, and I usually work from right to left. And once I'd done them, I think I got interrupted. So then I probably did bits on other occasions. This is what most of my sketchbook pages are like. So then the vertical structure seemed to go. I did the vetch and only had like a little cutting of it. So I didn't have the rest of the stem. So it meant that I needed to fit it in as a square. I had more of a stem of this one, so it meant that this was a longer one. So the layout then was long square. So I then had this little gap down here. So by using your ability to look at a flower from a different angle means that you've got the option of having rectangular shapes mainly and square shapes. So really, it's about sort of blocking in these different shapes and using them to work for you.
Can you hear me?
Hi.
This is Kate. Do you do your writing afterwards or before?
Bit of both, really. So sometimes.
So that the pale writing is the writing that I'm looking at.
Yes.
Did you do that before?
Yes. So in this instance, I did this top piece of writing before, and it's something that I do a lot in my sketchbooks when I don't have a lot of time to draw. Well, sometimes I have a lot of time to draw, but don't have a lot of time to paint. So if I'm out and about sketching, I would make a note of the things that I can see or feelings or experiences that I'm having onto the sketchbook page with a pencil, because it means it's really easy to take with you somewhere, and then make a sketch. And then generally the painting that happens over the top then happens over the top of the writing as well. So it starts to become quite illegible in a way that I can't read some of the little bits, but to me that's not a problem because I know that they're there. So it might be if you're a very neat person that you plan it a little bit more, but I always find it difficult talking about layout because I don't do a lot of planning. I tend to put something down on the page. So in this instance, it's always something like, if you see writing like this, that's always the bit that goes down first. And then I just kind of draw over the top and I don't worry about it going over the writing.
I like that. Oh,
good. Well, it works for me because it's just the way I think that my brain works, and the way that I work is that I'm not getting caught up in the layout really. Once you get one element down, you can then start to plan where other little bits fit. If you know that you can work in these kind of rectangular shapes or square shapes, you can just kind of fit them in. And then I make up stuff if I've got gaps. So I didn't really on this page need to write 1 oxeye daisies, 2 poppies, 3 wild geraniums and 4 vetch. I could have left that out if I had no gap, but this little gap was sat there and I felt that it obviously needed something at the time. So I just wrote that in afterwards to fill up the gap. So having fillers is really useful, and fillers for flowers can be anything. I mean, it's so, you could have little strand, you could have little bits of grass, you could have, I could have put in a little bit of this colour petal down here. Just a few little sort of dots of that colour would look really lovely and connective to this space. You could have a few leaf shapes, you could have Latin names, you could have tiny scraps of paper stuck in, which I'm going to show you my little paper technique in a minute. So as we've been using large to small in our drawing technique, large shape to smaller detail, it's the same, I think, with my layout, that I'm really looking at these sort of putting larger bits in, so large bits of text or larger shapes of flowers. And then once I've got these large shapes in, then worrying about the little gaps. So I think probably that line was just because that was a bit of a gap. And these bits of text were because there was a bit of a gap. So always look for those tiny fillers that you could use. They could be tiny bits of pollen, they could be little bees. There's no, this kind of looks like confetti here. There's no little other flowers that were there. I can't remember. I just put them there because I think that it linked to this page here and it was a bit of a filler. So I would say that probably that's my take home point regarding layout, is that whatever subject you're sketching on your page, if you've got a little filler that links to that subject, you're kind of made, really, because it means that the white spaces, any channels of gaps that you've got, you can just stick your filler in. And with flowers, it's endless. It really is endless. Obviously, when you're doing a journal, sticking in dates and time, you can also pop in things like weather conditions. So or what you were thinking or how you were feeling whilst you were there. Tiny notes can be made in little gaps. Looking at this, I feel like I almost need to put a little line there. I'm very big on drawing little frames around flowers. So here, this is this half finished one that I was working on to use as an example for this class. But I could, if I felt like these were floating, I could just with a coloured pencil add in a sort of a half frame. That's going to fill in some of this gap. I could pop in other flowers. I'm going to stick some names on this in a minute. You can see that I've got some pressed flowers stuck in here too. This is only because we were clearing out my daughter's bedroom and we found an old flower press and opened it up and found the flowers, and they were I think they were probably quite pretty and full of colour before they were pressed to death, but I thought we couldn't throw them away, so I'd stick them in, and they do add to the layout of the page. But this framing system works brilliantly for almost anything where you've got a random object that is floating in space. And the frame doesn't even have to go completely around it. I could start this frame here, midway around this plant, and it could be slightly fractured. So that's another really useful a useful filler, another sort of gap filler. One of the other things that works really well for layout is adding labels for plants so that you don't have to worry about the text element whilst you're doing the flowers. So I love sticking on bits of paper. You regulars will know that I love collage and old bits of paper. And once you've got a layout that you're sort of happy with, by creating little labels on bits of paper and having them as movable objects means that you don't need to make any commitment with this layout until you're happy, and you can add these little bits in and stick them down when you're ready. I'll show you how to do this little one. It's really, well, actually, it's just, I can just show you now, look. So it's cutting a little strip of paper with a little ribbony ends, and then just doing a little fold like that, like a little zigzag fold, like that on both ends, to give yourself like a little label. And then I'd probably stick it there and there. And you could it sits like a little 3D label, or you could just have it as a flat label. What I would do is cut the strip of paper first, really, really long, write the text on it, and then you can cut the paper down to fit the text. And I don't use any rulers, so it's all just very wonky. The best paper for doing things like this is having a little stash of bits of brown envelope, and you can cut them into label shapes. So again, that's a great filler. That would be a lovely label for the plantain. Or you could have repeated labels. But this again is another one of my really favorite little tricks of not worrying about layout, because you know that you can just keep adding more and more and more of the little labels and bits and pieces to it until you're happy and you don't have to stick them down. Bits of old book paper and old envelopes. This one's got a little bit of writing on there. Isn't that delicious? They've got a beautiful patina of old paper. So little labels made with old paper look fab against this beautiful sort of vintagey watercolor look. Brown manila envelopes. You can buy brown craft paper, you know, the sort of stuff used for packaging. Another lovely trick is to do some lettering on tracing paper. And again, if you stick it over your illustration, you see part of the illustration through it. So that can be a really nice technique. I've got a hand lettering class that I've done if you are not an experienced letterer. But equally, stuff like old typewriter letters, letters cut out of magazines, stamped letters, all look beautiful as labels for wildflower illustrations. And I'm doing a brush lettering class next if you want to know how to do lettering like this. So we'll be using mini pens and big pens and lots of practice, but it's very informal. So we're not wearing proper calligraphy hats. We're just being free and easy with the lettering, but it looks nice in combination with this. I've not finished these anemones, but you can see that I've done a little bit of brush lettering on top of the paint there. Okay, so is there any other stuff regarding layout that anybody would like to know at this stage? And I'll just show you the last little 5 minutes, just how to finish off your flowers, which is really, really quick. Is that all right with layout? Yeah, well, basically, I think I don't like working with a plan, because the plan stops me being creative. It just puts the brakes on completely. So if I know that I've got all these little tricks that I can pull out and I can just make a start with a page, then I'm away. So I know that even if it starts to look a bit weird, or I've got, you know, a little flower over here that I think, oh, I don't really like that, I know that I could stick literally a label right over it, or another little piece of paper as a box and cover it up. There's so many things you can do if you know that you can add and take away these different elements. So it's good to have a cheat like that. Okay, so for all of you regulars, the finishing off is the same like it always is, really. Just going back to these. And again, the same principle applies to every flower that I would do. So if I've got lighter elements, I put my, here we go. So let's go back to this plantain here. You can see these tiny little white seed heads, and I've got a white uni pin Posca pen, or you can use a white gel pen or a little bit of white gouache, and bringing in those little seed heads in those dark, where those darker areas are, is probably is that a third element of contrast. And I'm looking at my image again. So if I was out and about in the field, I probably wouldn't do this little seedy bit out in the field. I'd just go with a pencil, a pen, and maybe some paint. And I'd just sketch shapes and I'd go in with a bit more detail. And quite often I make notes on colour. That's why I'm not too worried about getting the colour right. And then I paint it when I get home. So, and that's come as a result of being out and about on holiday and days out with children where I just never ever had any time on my own where I could get lots of paint out and be immersed. It was always just very quick sketching that I was doing at like my daughter's gymnastics, sketching the ladies that were chatting about funny things and stuff, just with a biro that I bought from WH Smith's normally. So I've just added a few more little highlights onto that one there. Now I feel like this is probably representational enough to tell me, you know, I'm happy with that as a finished illustration. But if you feel like yours needs pulling in a little bit and more refined detail, then you can always go in with coloured pencil to add other details. So I've got a watercolour pencil here. You could use oil-based pencils. I know loads of you have got Prismacolor pencils. This is Supracolor, Caran d'Ache. And you could just add, if you've got little feathery textures, just using a pencil can be useful if you want to refine some of the areas of brushwork. When we've done detailed paintings in this class where you've needed to get a straight line, we've used pencils before to pull in the lines and edges. I feel like with this, we don't really need to do that because it's quite nice that it's free-flowing and loose. But it might be that there are some areas that you feel you want to make darker or lighter, and the pencils are great for that. So, for instance, against this green, you could use a white pencil to bring in some leaf textures, just as another way of drawing. You could also use a pencil to darken areas of your stem. And if your hand is very wobbly painting the stem, it might be that you don't paint it at all and you just use coloured pencil, because that part is more tricky to do. So if you've got detailed elements, sticking in a bit of pencil is not cheating. It means you're a full-blown illustrator and it's allowed. So you're getting another little area of contrast with this. Again, maybe your leaves that you found were feathery and using a brush is difficult, but a pencil you could use to really tell the story of that wildflower and get another one more layer of contrast against the, oops, I think that was the cat, sorry. Got a whole menagerie in here tonight. So you've got this looseness, you've got tight flower, loose undergrowth and foliage, and then another sort of tight little rendering with your pencil. And like I said, this applies to all flowers. So your challenge really now at the end of this workshop is to see if you can apply this technique to one other flower or more on the photographs, and maybe try going out this weekend, finding a flower and using the techniques to sketch in real life. Scary, but it's okay. You could even just pick that flower, bring it home and put it in a vase and then sit at your table with all your stuff out. But try drawing from life. It's going to really, I think it's easy with flowers because it doesn't have to be precise. It can be a bit wonky and it's fine. It's all good. It'll look better if it's wonky. So whilst I've got my stuff out here, I'm aware that we're gone half an hour over, and I'm so sorry, everybody, but I hope that you've enjoyed the session. Whilst I've got my desk stuff down here, is there anything else that anybody wanted to ask or see before we take a look at anyone's stuff that they'd like to show?
I was wondering what brand of pan watercolors you use.
So my watercolours are all tube watercolours, and they are Winsor & Newton. I'll just come back up and see you. Hi. They're Winsor & Newton or Daniel Smith watercolours, professional grade ones. So I always had a little palette of Cotman watercolours for years and years and years that I got when I was 18. And it's only very recently that I've gone pro with my watercolours. They're very expensive to buy them like that, but I just love them. And I always weigh up the price of art materials against a pint of lager in UK pubs, and it's like cheap. I mean, the materials are compared to going out for a night in a pub. Yeah, so I hope that helps.
Definitely, thank you.
Any other questions at this stage before?
There was a question about how you stain the page. Sorry about the terrible music in the background.
This is Gavin at the music festival. Tom Jones is playing at 9:30, so he's got to whiz off. So he's probably, you're missing Tom Jones, Gav, sorry. The staining, I hope I've explained that. If anybody that's asked that question about the staining, if I've not explained it properly, then please ask again, but hopefully I've kind of covered that. Okay. So at this stage, let's say the session has now finished. So if you need to go and recover and have a gin, please feel free to whiz off and go and have a lie down. I know that some of you might need to, especially, I think it was Kate at the beginning, it wasn't very well. Go and have a lie down. If you'd like to stay on, and I know loads of you like to, sit back and relax. And if anyone would like to share a bit of work for the next 10 minutes, you don't have to. You can stay on and look at other people's work, but there are a few people that I know like to share, and that's brilliant, and lots of you that like to see. So goodbye to those of you that need to go, and you'll get the video tomorrow. Bye, Kelly. Those of you that would like to stay, nice to
say thank you.
Thank you. Please feel free to stay if you want to. And if you want to show work, just hold it up in the corner of your screen like this so that I know that I can spotlight you. But like I said, if you want to stay and you don't want to share work, that's fine too. It's just lovely to see people's work. So who've we got? Helen. Hilda. Hi, Hilda. Oh, there's beautiful work.
It's not easy to see, but
it's lovely.
I do my best. I think it's I have problem with mixing colors.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So a bit of practice with the color mixing. But for me, I just think it looks beautiful, the work you've done. Really lovely. Well done.
Really enjoyed it.
Fantastic.
So thank you.
Nice to see you, Hilda.
Bye.
Bye. I slept in that attic once, didn't I? In Hilda's attic in Norway. And very cozy it was too. Helen?
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. This is my first sketch class. I bought a few of yours, but I've absolutely loved it because I'm scared of colour.
Are you? So this was a good one for you then, Helen.
Yeah. So I've learned so much. It's unbelievable. And all my sketchbook, which I lovingly adorned before the class with some of your lettering.
Oh, yes. I remember I saw this on Instagram, Helen.
Yeah,
it's lovely.
yeah. You said it was lovely, and I said it's all your own work because you taught me everything I know. So thank you so much. Fantastic class. I love it.
Oh, that's brilliant, Helen. Thank you for sharing your work. It's really beautiful. You should be so proud if that's your first one. It's honestly amazing.
Thank you.
Big star. I'm going to give you a badge, a big medal.
Thanks.
Pleasure. I need to make some downloadable medals for everybody. You can print them out if you want to. Brave Pants medals, that's what we need. Or a Brave Pants t-shirt. Georgie with the lush glasses. Hello. Oh, that's God, these are looking amazing, everybody.
It all got a bit wet, but I quite enjoyed it being quite wet.
Yes, yeah, it's lovely. And
Lovely, great fun. Thank you.
the colour around your daisy, so it's feverfew, isn't it? But it really pops. You've got a lovely dark blend of colour there.
Yeah, it's a lot of indigo went in there.
Yeah, doesn't it look fab though? And it's great to be brave, isn't it?
Yes, and that trick about doing it wet and then putting the other colour in and just letting it do its own thing to the boundaries is fantastic.
Exciting, isn't it?
It
Yeah,
lovely.
lovely to see you. Who have we got? Josephine. Hello. Oh, what beautiful work.
I wasn't very organised. I only had little scraps of paper.
Oh, it works well. You could stick those in a sketchbook though, couldn't you?
Could, yes.
They look so beautiful.
Thank you. It was lovely. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Lovely petal pulling I can see going on there.
It's good, isn't it?
Gorgeous. It's gorgeous and beautiful colours. Thanks for sharing. Who else have we got? Margaret. What I love to see when we do this sharing is everybody sort of there with their specs on like that, looking with a glass of wine. I can have a break now. Hi, Margaret.
Yeah, I enjoyed doing that, and I tried really new things, and
you've got some great results.
Yeah, I was happy with it, and I'll definitely have a go over the weekend.
Yes.
And,
you're going to be brave and have a sketch of an actual flower.
Yes, yeah.
Good.
I've got lots of things in the garden, and I think, right, I've got to go and just sit out and do some or bring them in and have a go. So
yeah, and you might get some that you think, oh, I'm not so happy with that, but there might be some that you are just so surprised that the results that you get. And then you'll learn each one that and especially the ones that go a little bit wrong are the best ones, because that's how you think, I'm definitely not going to do that again.
So thanks, Lucia. It was a great session.
Brilliant, lovely. Thanks for coming. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Who else have we got? Vicky. Hello. Hello, girls.
How are you doing?
Hi. What have we got here then?
Well, this is Lily.
Let's have a look, Lily. Close up. Oh my goodness.
I'm very
Lily, for the last few weeks, you've been showing us all up. And this week is no exception. That is so beautiful. I love all your studies.
Very good.
Fantastic colour mixing. Absolutely lovely, Lily. Did you enjoy the workshop?
Yes.
Brilliant.
And she loves to share at the end of the class.
Oh, that's great, Lily. It's nice to be nosy, isn't it, Lily?
I also made this little book about mixing colours and colours.
Oh my goodness, that's brilliant. Oh, I love it. I used to love making books when I was younger. I used to try and staple them in the middle. Have you ever tried doing that?
Yeah, but it's just that our staplers ran out.
It's empty.
It's quite hard as well, isn't it, to do a staple? Oh, it's so nice. Well done for making your little book. And Mum Vicky, yours looks fab too. You always do so much work, Vicky.
Well, I tried with different pens, so you can see this one's a black fountain pen that's not waterproof, and I really like how it works. It just
I like that too.
Yeah,
it's really lovely how the ink's leaked into all of the watercolor, isn't it?
Yeah, I quite like that, so I might try that again.
Yeah, definitely put that in the bank, the art bank. Yes, well done. Gorgeous work.
Say good night because I have to go and play some tunes now. So
okay. Good night, Lily. Sleep tight. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Nice to see you.
Now,
Deborah.
we have to go, sweetie.
Oh, Deborah, that's so lovely. Not juicy enough. No comment. Oh God, it's lovely. The colours you've got on that purpley red are just lovely and gorgeous notes. So is this in a sketchbook? We can't hear you. I'm thinking that it is, in which case,
it's in the sketchbook.
So this is one of those lovely illustrated sketchbook pages, isn't it? Full of
Yes,
little
it is.
blobs
And
of
I'll keep
colour.
adding to it.
Oh, brilliant. And little notes. It's fantastic.
Yeah, actually, I'll show you more.
Oh, there's the other page. Brilliant. That was a treasure.
When I take classes, I usually do a couple pages in my sketchbook on them.
It's a great way to remember, isn't it?
Yes.
Because when you look back at that page, it's like you're back in the workshop, I think. You hear the things that were being said again.
Yes, definitely for me.
Yeah.
And next time I will show my face.
Oh, bless you. I'll remove the spotlight so you can show your pretty face. We won't.
Thank you.
We can see your eyebrows. Who've we got? Laura. Hey, there's an art party going on, Laura. This is nice.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a little carried away with the white pen.
Oh yeah, I know, it's easy, isn't it? Because it's so lovely.
Yeah, but that was a lot of fun. And then at the end of the workshop, my daughter Lucy joined.
Okay. Oh, hi Lucy. Oh, Lucy, that's so good. I don't know if we can let you come again, Lucy. You're just too good. That's so beautiful. What great work you girls have done in that house of art.
Thank you.
You're so clever. Thanks for sharing.
This is lovely. We'll definitely be back. Thank you.
Brilliant.
So much.
You're very welcome. Nice to see you. I always usually, for all of you guys that aren't in the UK, say hello to the non-UKers, because it's really nice to have everybody from all over the world, isn't it? Very exciting. Hello. So who've I got here? Oh, Denise.
Hiya. This is Caitlin, my granddaughter.
Hello.
So,
you got roped in, did you, Caitlin?
She did. Well, no, she asked to do it.
Oh, that's good. That's a good sign.
Yeah, so I booked her on. So she's very new to watercolour. So she's been using the different techniques that you've been telling us. So,
oh, that's great.
And she thinks it's great. She thinks
that's good. And actually very annoyingly good.
Yes, exactly.
For a beginner. I don't know if we can let you come again. It's lovely. Oh, I love all your blending that you've got there, Caitlin. It's gorgeous.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really enjoyable.
Fantastic. And Denise, yours looks lovely too. You've
Yes,
got some really nice colours and some nice pulling of colour there.
Yes, techniques are just great, aren't they?
I know, they're fab, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so much fun to, you know, there's loads more work to do with that, and you guys can have fun playing with those in lots of different ways. Oh, lovely, gorgeous page you've got there. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
It's nice to be nosy, isn't it, everybody? We just, yes, said Nikki. We like looking at everyone's houses too. Yes. Anyone else for a share? Holding a little bit of paper up. Oh, Sarah. Oh, Sarah. How's your bad leg?
Oh, it's still broken, you know.
Oh no. Poor old soul.
I've had to get this special chair from a charity shop so that I can push myself out of it.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking. Well, both Nikki and I on here, we've got invalid tables that are like old charity shop hospital tables.
Well, I've got one of those. That's what I'm working on. It wheels around. Look, I can wheel it.
You're never going to get rid of these brilliant things now, are you?
I love it. It's fantastic for doing art on. It's brilliant. Anyway, what a great class. That's that. And then I did this.
Oh, hang on. Don't rush through. We want to have a look. Oh, lovely. Oh, nice blends.
And
Very nice, Sarah.
And then, now I did this, but I've actually cut it in half because I'm going to stick it into my.
Ooh, that's like a whole border that you've done.
Can you see?
Yeah, it looks lovely.
But I quite like them as two separate pieces of work.
Really interesting.
So I cut it in half.
It's nice to chop things up, isn't it? Because they start to exist on their own. Really exciting.
Anyway,
love it. Love it.
It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, as always.
Fantastic. Lovely. Well, good luck with your leg.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Anyone else like to share? Just check.
I'd like to share.
Whereabouts are you? Is that?
I'm here.
Is that Sally? Hi, Sally.
Yeah. Hi. I haven't. I was so enthralled with your painting techniques. I didn't, except for this first one that I put down. So I've got everything in my head and all the little drawings. But before I came on this week, I gave all the children in church a little concertina thing like this to write thank yous each day of the week.
Oh, wow.
But now I would go back and do it a different way, but this was kind of fun.
It's
that was
so funny.
Oh, so the first one was, it's hard to do it. Sunday was that sort of thing. Then Monday was that sort of thing. And then Tuesday was a baby robin.
It's a whole week.
In America,
idea.
yes, in America we have funny robins, but they're huge. So it was a baby robin, and then this was yesterday, a borage. And look, isn't that chamomile or feverfew? Isn't that what we did?
Yeah, it does.
today?
It looks just like that. Yes.
Oh my gosh, I was so excited to see your borage because I'm growing these in my little garden. What did I do today? And today is just books. But I'm so excited for today. It was so interesting. I loved your colors and I love the different techniques here.
That's great.
Next week I'm going to do a concertina with the little girl who showed her books. I make a lot of little books. But the concertina is kind of fun because you can do a little ditty on each thing.
You definitely can. So that could be a great, you've inspired us now, Sally, because we could use your idea to make a concertina book full of wildflowers.
Absolutely. Yes. And in fact, Nikki is on here, or she was.
Yes.
Nikki Franklin. Yeah. And I've been joining her for her wildflower embroidery.
Amazing.
A new flower every month, and I love it. So I'm wildflower crazy. And one more thing.
Yeah.
Because I live in Vermont now, but this is Wildflowers of Britain. What a great book. And I think you have one very similar to this, but this is by month.
Gorgeous.
So
thank you for the
tip.
tip.
You can't have too many books.
You're so right, Sally. Thank you so much for sharing your beautiful work.
Thank you for your beautiful class. I can't wait for the next one.
Oh my goodness. I've got a lot to live up to now. Thanks, Sally. Just checking in. Anyone else? Oh, Sue, I don't want to leave you out, Sue. Hello. I can't hear you. Just if you press down on your... Oh, there we go.
Muted. So I've been following you for quite a long while, and this is the first class I've done with you, but this is what we came up with. Can you see it's a bit dark?
Yeah. No, it's really beautiful. Haven't you done an amazing job?
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much indeed. And I've enjoyed looking at other people's as well, because you've been inspired by them too. So that was great. Thank you.
You see, I think the people that leave, they just think, oh, they need to go and get a glass of wine or something like that, have a lie down. I completely agree that they, you know, sometimes you feel you need to do that, but I think they're all really missing out. I agree with you, Sue, that it's so nice, isn't it, to see people's work and that everybody's approached things differently and you can steal ideas. It's lovely.
I also love that I'm not the only person in my village. We're also in Gloucestershire, but another Sue is in the same village as me, so that was quite funny.
Oh, that's so nice. There's a little connection over the airwaves. It's lovely, isn't it? And when we were in all the main lockdowns, that was the really lovely thing, especially about this class, is that it's nice that we can connect anyway, but it was lovely to see regulars that I would normally see in real classes.
Yes, well, I hope to be back too, so thank you very much.
Oh, good. Now, I don't want to leave anyone out. If you've plucked up the courage and you want to share and you've got a little bit of paper, wave it around. But if not, then I need to let you go to bed. Right, just checking. No, we've just got the hardy few left. I'm going to let you all go. Lots of love to you all. Have a good weekend and enjoy drawing wildflowers. Bye.
Bye, Lucia. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.